I never thought there would come a day when I'd be sitting across from my father-in-law in an emergency boardroom meeting, him begging for an extension on a loan from the very bank I run. He used to look at me with disdain, the coffee-serving waitress, as he once sneered. But this time, his eyes were filled with worry and desperation. If you think honor can be bought with money, let me tell you how a proud man was brought to his knees by his own arrogance. I didn't seek revenge. I simply let the truth speak. And oh, it hurt more than any insult he ever threw at me. You know what's ironic? For nearly 2 years my husband's entire family had no idea who I really was. They saw me wiping tables and pouring coffee, thought I was a nobody, while every week I was signing off on loan approvals worth hundreds of times more than their entire net worth. My name is Bella. I'm 32, born and raised in Des Moines, Iowa. A place far from the glamour of New York or the lights of Vegas, but, to me, it's where everything began. My family was so poor that breakfast was sometimes just a few slices of stale bread my mom picked up from the nearby bakery. My dad used to drive cross-country trucks covering thousands of miles just to send money home. Mom worked days as a cashier at a discount store, then washed dishes at a Chinese restaurant by night. Dad used to say, "Knowledge is the one thing no one can steal from you, Bella. They can take your home, your car, even your hope. But if you have knowledge, you can start again." I didn't understand that back then, but I listened, dutifully. While kids my age hung out at the mall or stared at their phones for hours, I buried myself in books. In the summers, I worked at the public library. In the winters, I shoveled snow to save every penny for tuition. I earned a full-ride scholarship to the University of Chicago, majoring in finance. And from there everything started to change. Graduating top of my class, I landed a job at one of the largest investment banks in the U.S. It was another world. Tens of millions of dollars moving across conference tables. M&A deals that shook the markets, meetings where silence was more powerful than praise. I stepped in as a stranger and became a regional CEO by 30. I oversaw corporate credit, managing a loan portfolio worth over $8 billion. A number that made even industry veterans cautious. But I didn't boast. No photos, no updated LinkedIn bio. No one in my husband's family, not even James, had ever seen my office. Or knew how many people reported to me. Why? Because I was tired of being looked at with opportunism, comparison, or worse, labeled that arrogant successful woman. On weekends, I'd leave the office early, swap my tailored blazer for a cotton apron, and work as a barista at a small coffee shop in downtown Nashville. I loved how the smell of freshly ground beans could soothe a pressure-packed week. I loved talking to customers like real people, not numbers or loan profiles. There, no one knew I was a CEO, I was just Bella, the girl who made coffee, drew hearts on lattes, and grinned at first-time customers. And that's exactly where I met James. It was pouring that day. Rain pounding hard enough to flood Nashville's sidewalks. I was wiping down the counter after serving the last group of customers, when the door swung open, the bell ringing long and strange, like fate knocking. He walked in, drenched from head to toe, dark gray coat soaked through, rain-matted hair. But his smile was warmer than the cafe's golden lights. I didn't look up right away, just heard a deep, slightly raspy voice say, "An cappuccino, please. Extra foam if you can. And maybe something to make this miserable day a little better." I looked up, just in time to meet his eyes, steady but not scrutinizing, a rare kind of gaze. No judgment, no expectations. I smiled, sprinkled some cinnamon on the foam, then used a toothpick to draw a tilted heart. "Hope this is enough to save your day," I said, sliding the cup toward him. He looked at the heart, then at me, eyes lighting up. "Do you know this is the first time I've smiled in 3 days?" I just gave a small smile and turned away like it was something I did every day, which it was, but no one had ever said that to me before. The next day he came back. This time the sun was out, but his shirt was still a bit wrinkled, like he'd just come off a job site. "I think I'm addicted to the coffee here," he said as I dried a glass. Or maybe I'm addicted to the way you draw hearts, who knows? We started talking more with each cup. His name was James Carter, 34, an architect specializing in sustainable homes. He had left a big firm in Boston to open his own studio in Nashville, because he wanted to create something real, not just something that looked good on camera. I laughed, surprised someone outside of finance could also see through the polished surface of the world. James spoke with a calm but profound manner. No grand speeches, no taking credit. Just stories, about fixing up the house for an elderly neighbor, or redesigning a playground for a public elementary school, free of charge. I started to look forward to him walking through the cafe door, even though I always kept a straight face. One time I joked, "Don't you get bored? This place is tiny, no strong Wi-Fi, no fancy pendant lights." He took a sip of his espresso, set the cup down and looked straight at me. "You're here. That's enough." It felt like someone slapped me right in the chest. Not painful, just stunning. How long had it been since someone spoke to me like that? As if I were a real person, not a title, a bank account or a resume. 10 years, maybe longer. When James asked me to dinner, I hesitated. I was afraid. Truly afraid. Afraid of what would happen if he found out who I really was, what lay at the end of this path. But I still said yes. We had dinner at a small BBQ joint tucked into a busy neighborhood. No candles, no jazz, just loud chatter and the smell of grilled meat everywhere. I had never felt so at ease sitting next to a man. No makeup, no gown. Just Bella, in an old t-shirt and an unguarded smile. James told me about his childhood, about how he once dropped out of school for a year to take care of his mom after a stroke, about the trauma of watching his father's construction business go bankrupt over a small mistake. "Ever since, I've hated superficial things," he said, then turned to me. "And I like what's real. Like you." "I'm just a coffee girl," I said softly, not out of modesty, but because part of me wanted to believe it was true. James didn't answer right away. He just reached out and held my hand. Rough, warm, steady. "No. You're the one thing that makes this world feel a little kinder." We started dating after that night. James never asked how much money I made, where I lived or what car I drove. He only cared if I was tired that day, what I felt like eating, or whether I needed him to drive me home. And for the first time in my life, I felt loved. Not for what I had, but for who I was. But then, one day, James said something that made my heart sink. "I want you to meet my family. But I should warn you, they're not the easiest on people who aren't from the same status." I laughed, half real, half forced. "Don't worry. I'm used to people who think they're on a different level. I don't realize that would become a prophecy, but I remember the first dinner at James's family home as clearly as if it happened last night. James held my hand tightly as we stepped through the iron gate into his family's estate, a neoclassical mansion on the outskirts of Franklin, Tennessee. Soaring ceilings, sparkling crystal chandeliers, wooden floors that echoed under each step. The air smelled of old money and older prejudice. Just before we entered, James looked at me and whispered, "They're a bit traditional. Don't let them get to you." I smiled, a paper-thin smile. I've lived my whole life under judging eyes. Trust me, I know how to swallow it without choking. But I had underestimated them. Severely. His father, Richard Carter, 65, founder of Carter & Sons Real Estate Group, greeted me with a stiff handshake and a look like he was appraising an item on a shelf. He didn't bother asking what I did, just stared at my shoes and my neatly tied hair. His mother, Evelyn Carter, a former Vanderbilt beauty queen and now a silent icon of high society charity galas, greeted me with a thin smile and a glance over James's shoulder. "Oh. So this is the Bella you've mentioned?" Then there was Claire, James's sister, currently in an MBA program at Duke, standing with her arms crossed by the staircase, lips pressed like she was holding back a laugh. "What do you do?" Claire asked the moment I sat down at the white linen-covered table. I work at a coffee shop, I answered calmly, pouring water into my glass. The air froze for a beat. Evelyn put down her fork and looked at me over her rhinestone glasses. A coffee shop? Yes, ma'am, I enjoy the work, I replied, trying to keep my smile intact. Richard chuckled. A low, contemptuous sound. James, didn't you say she went to college? What kind of degree holder ends up serving coffee? James squeezed my hand under the table, trying to explain. She has a finance degree, but she prefers her current job. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong, Evelyn snapped. We didn't raise you to marry someone without ambition. Claire cleared her throat, feigning casualness while still eyeing me with smug amusement. At least you have health insurance, right? I laughed, for real this time. Yes, and I have life insurance, property insurance, and even professional liability insurance if anyone's curious. James was about to speak when Richard slammed his hand on the table. In this family, we believe in success, not serving tables. If you plan to marry this girl, don't expect our support. The months that followed taught me the true meaning of upper-class Cold War. Every time I attended a Carter family gathering, Evelyn made sure I sat as far from the center of the table as possible. Claire constantly brought up potential matches James should meet. Daughters of lawyers, doctors, young entrepreneurs. Richard was like a broken record. Every time he saw me, he'd repeat the same line. James, you know, sometimes love is blind. But don't let it ruin your future. I never responded. I let them talk. I let them assume. Because I was hiding a secret. One that, if even a corner of it slipped out, would turn their whole world upside down. Then, one winter evening, James knelt under the Christmas tree in my tiny apartment and handed me a platinum ring with a deep sapphire. The color of my eyes, he said. I know this won't be easy, but I don't want to live another day without you. Please, marry me. I nodded, no hesitation, no fear. The next day, James told his family. And that's when hell truly began. Richard called him into his private office. A room lined with awards, prestigious trophies, and photos of him shaking hands with politicians. Marry her and I'll cut you off. Not a dime, no shares, no inheritance. You'll be erased from the company. James stood tall, his voice trembling but firm. If you think money can change my mind, then you never really knew me. Claire screamed that he was disgracing the whole family. Evelyn cried, calling me a sweet little gold digger. James walked out of the mansion in silence, carrying only a suitcase. He didn't take a single dollar from his family. And me? I stayed silent the entire ride home, not because I was hurt, but because I knew this was only the beginning. We held our wedding on a June afternoon, just as the wildflowers at Radnor Lake Park had begun to bloom, and the Tennessee sky was so clear it felt like the universe itself was giving us its blessing. No extravagant dress, no diamond-encrusted rings, no big guest list. Just me, James, a few close friends, and an old pastor with a smoker's rasp. No one from James's family came, not a call, not a message, not even a card. It wasn't surprising. They had disowned him the moment he announced he was marrying the delusional waitress with a dignity complex. That same day, Richard wiped his name from company records. Evelyn blocked all contact. And Claire? She left just one cold message. Don't call me your sister again. But he still chose me. And in that moment, between the rustling oak trees and the tear-filled eyes of James as he said I do, I knew I had chosen the right man. Not because he gave up his fortune, but because he didn't hesitate. Because he loved me. Not for a name, not for approval, just for being me. We rented a small apartment on the east side of Nashville, where the balcony overlooked a red brick church and an old bakery that smelled like brown butter every morning. Every Monday morning, I'd put on my blazer, grab my leather tote, and walk into First Line Capital as the regional CEO, where I oversaw a corporate credit portfolio worth over $8 billion. Meetings, balance sheets, merger plans, credit investigations. It was all in my hands. I made the calls on deals where a single mistake could bring down an entire corporation. But I kept everything under wraps. No office photos on social media. No title dropped at gatherings. To the outside world, except for a few trusted colleagues, I was still Bella, the gentle barista, on weekends. On weekends I returned to my gray apron, working at Everground Cafe, where the smell of Arabica mingled with buttery cookies, where people called me by name, not by title. James once asked me, "Doesn't it feel strange, handling a $400 million deal on Monday morning, then scrubbing an old espresso machine on Saturday?" I shrugged, still stirring a cappuccino. "No, one is responsibility, the other is peace. I need both." He didn't laugh. He just looked at me for a long time, then said, "Maybe, there's no one else in the world quite like you." I never intentionally hid anything from James. He knew I studied finance, knew I had knowledge, experience. But I never told him exactly what position I held, not because I was lying, but because I wanted to be sure this love wasn't touched by status or wealth. He never pushed me to share, never asked about my income or to see a contract. When I came home late, he only asked, "Rough day?" Never, "How many deals did you close?" And I valued that more than any bouquet or fancy dinner others might think defines love. One night, while reviewing credit reports from real estate companies in the region, a name popped up at the top of the file: Carter Holdings. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. Carter Holdings, the company owned by Richard, my father-in-law. I read every line of that report, every chart, every financial ratio with the cold precision of a professional. And I saw something was off. Very off. Assets were grossly overvalued, debts were hidden as investment advances. And, more concerning, a string of subsidiaries registered in the Cayman Islands. It felt like someone was squeezing my heart. I stepped away from the screen, out onto the balcony, staring at the streetlights, twinkling under the night sky. Inside, my husband sat reading in the living room, warm yellow light casting a calm glow on his face. Peaceful, unaware that the storm was coming. From the very family he thought he had walked away from. I knew I had to stay silent. It wasn't time. Not yet time for James to know the truth about me, or the slow-burning wreckage beneath the empire his father had built. This peace, the pure love between two people, might not last much longer. And the bitter truth is, I'm the only one who can stop the collapse. Or let it happen, just as his family always thought of me, a coffee girl, nothing more. 1 year after our wedding, an invitation from the Carter family unexpectedly arrived in our mailbox. Thick cardstock, gold trim, embossed lettering full of flair. Cordially inviting James and wife to the annual Carter family gathering at the Carter estate. Dress code? Formal. No children. James looked at me, eyes thoughtful. "I know you don't want to go, but they're still family." I folded the invitation, coldness creeping through my fingers. Guess they remembered they had a son. James sighed, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "If you don't want to, I'll decline." I was silent for a few seconds. "No. I'll go." Not because I expected an apology, but because I needed to be there when everything they once looked down on came knocking on the doors of that proud castle. The gathering took place on a Sunday afternoon, on the estate grounds so wide they looked like a golf course. Belmead, where only the worthy used to be welcome. The guest list was long, fine wine flowed non-stop, and classical music hummed from a live band under the veranda. I wore a simple black dress, no jewelry, no flash. James gripped my hand tightly as we walked through the gates. As soon as we stepped into the marble-tiled garden, I heard Claire's voice, shrill like nails on a glass. "Oh, look who's here! Still pouring coffee for a living?" Laughter erupted from the group standing beside her. I didn't even bother turning around. It wasn't worth it. Evelyn, in a lavender dress, approached with a polite smile laced with venom. "Bella, Would you like to go help the servers inside? You look like you'd handle a wine tray well. James squeezed my hand harder. I set my glass down and replied in a voice soft as velvet. Evelyn, if I were serving, I'd have to ask people like you to hand over a credit card first. She went pale, but before she could respond, a familiar voice rang out. Loud, deep, confident. Richard Carter, in a light gray tuxedo, stood in the center of the garden raising his glass. Thank you all for coming. Today we celebrate another successful year for Carter Holdings, and the return of James, with his wife, the barista I'm sure you all remember. Laughter followed, and this time I saw James step back. But before he could react, a brunette woman in a business dress rushed out of the house, face tight with panic. Mr. Carter, an urgent call from the bank, the loan's been denied. The air vanished. Richard spun around. What? You must be mistaken. No, sir, they said a new audit order came from the CEO, all files have been frozen. Richard went pale. His glass slipped and shattered on the stone. Evelyn rushed to his side. Claire looked around in confusion. I pulled my phone from my purse, slid in a Bluetooth earpiece, and said quickly, "Send me the detailed report. I need confirmation on the falsified assets and interbank loans." James turned to me, stunned. You're talking about my father's company? I looked him straight in the eyes, for the first time hiding nothing. I'm the regional CEO of First Line Capital. The loan your father applied for 3 weeks ago landed on my desk. The entire garden froze. Claire's mouth hung open. Evelyn stepped back. And Richard stood as still as stone. I don't understand, he stammered, voice shaking. You're the one who denied my loan? I walked toward him, step by step, voice clear and firm. Yes, I ordered the audit when I saw financial indicators were falsified, and cash was being funneled through shell companies. I'm following protocol. Richard flushed red, shouting, You dare do this to me? I'm your father-in-law. No, I said, pulling my employee badge from my purse and holding it high. You're a businessman applying for a loan with fraudulent reports, and I'm the one responsible for approving or rejecting it. Family doesn't exempt you from the law. Evelyn stammered, trying to grab my sleeve. Bella, you can't let the press find out about this. I turned to her, eyes cold as steel. You once told me I'd never be worthy of James, didn't you? Then maybe you should be thanking me for not calling the police right here and now. All eyes turned toward me as I walked out of the garden. James followed silently behind. Behind us, Richard shouting on the phone, Evelyn's panicked screeches, and Claire's heels slipping on the stone floor blended together, like a chorus of collapse. I didn't feel relieved. I only felt this ending was inevitable. And it was only the prologue of what was to come. I hadn't even reached the gates of the estate when I heard a voice behind me, urgent, trembling, nearly desperate. Bella, wait, please. I turned around. Richard Carter was rushing toward me, salt and pepper hair disheveled, looking nothing like the commanding chairman who once silenced entire auditoriums with a single glance. James instinctively stepped in front of me, but I placed a hand on his shoulder and gently moved him aside. If you have something to say, say it, but I'm not promising I'll listen. Richard was panting, his face drawn tight like a man who'd just survived an earthquake. We're family, he said, as if dragging each word from his throat. No matter what's happened, you're James's wife. I'm sorry for what I said before, but the company is on the brink. I need your help. I looked straight into his eyes, for the first time without fear or restraint. You're calling me family? Since when? When you threatened to cut James off if he married me? Or when you laughed at my job like it was a stain on his name? He faltered, looking away. I could save your company, but I won't. Bella, please, he said, voice almost breaking. If word gets out about the audit, the stock will crash. This family will lose everything. I smiled faintly, without pity. Family? Family is about love, trust, and protection, not ridicule, rejection, or judgment based on where someone comes from. Which of those have you ever shown me? I turned to leave, but Claire appeared, her eyes wide with disbelief and panic. She still held a half-full champagne glass, her hand slightly trembling. No way! You're the one who handled the loan? You're the bank's CEO? I looked her straight in the eye. That's right, and I'm also the one who uncovered the shell companies you helped your father set up in the Cayman Islands. Would you like me to list them? MTS Enterprises, Langford Holdings, Haven & Co. Claire went pale, the glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the stone. I didn't know anything, she shrieked, her voice high-pitched. Dad told me I was just signing admin papers. I didn't know it was fraud. I slowly stepped toward her. My voice wasn't loud, but it rang out, clear as day. You signed off on inflated asset reports, tripled in value. You transferred funds to subsidiaries with no real employees. And you approved a fake asset sheet for loan applications to 3 major banks, mine included. Claire froze. Evelyn finally stepped out from the veranda, face white as paper. Bella, sweetheart, this is all a misunderstanding. Please don't escalate this. Family matters should stay in the family, shouldn't they? I turned to her, my gaze cold as steel. You once told me I was a stain, that I dragged James down. So tell me, who's dragging this entire family into the abyss now? Evelyn took a step closer, reaching out, voice cracking. I was just afraid you'd hurt him. Don't you understand? Someone like you. How could I trust you? I let out a bitter laugh. My first one that wasn't masked. You never even tried to understand, because you couldn't believe a girl from Iowa, who grew up in a rented home, worked weekends as a barista, could run a banking portfolio worth over $8 billion. Silence blanketed the entire garden. The string quartet had stopped playing long ago. Guests stood frozen, hand in hand, barely breathing. Richard swallowed hard, rage flushing his face red. You can't do this. You're destroying an entire empire. I pulled out my phone, opened the banking app, and held the screen up to him, clearly displaying my title. Regional Executive Officer. First Line Capital. No, you destroyed it. I'm just exposing the truth. James finally stepped forward, standing beside me, looking his father straight in the eye. I tried. I begged you to accept her, but you chose pride over truth. And now? You're begging the same woman you once called a waitress? That's poetic. Richard opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. I turned away, my voice steady and final. Tomorrow morning you'll see me again, but not as your daughter-in-law, as the client under fraud investigation. I walked off, each step of my low heels echoing sharply against the stone. Behind me an empire began to crack. And I was the first fracture. The next morning at exactly 9 as scheduled, Richard Carter arrived at the headquarters of First Line Capital, not as a powerful real estate mogul, but as a desperate, empty-handed businessman, flanked by 2 tense-faced attorneys. I was already waiting in the 21st floor conference room, where floor-to-ceiling glass offered a panoramic view of Nashville, bathed in morning sunlight. A soft breeze stirred the silk curtains, but it wasn't enough to ease the cold tension that filled the room. Richard entered, avoiding eye contact, and sat down across from me as if weighed down by his own guilt. I didn't offer tea, didn't smile, didn't bother with any pleasantries. You have 15 minutes. I said evenly, my voice calm like a lake before a storm. One of the lawyers tried a smile. We're hoping to reach an agreement regarding the audit. There are a few clauses, my client. I cut him off. He's no longer a client. He's under criminal investigation. Richard slammed his hand on the table and roared, What the hell do you want? You've already won. You could save the company, save the Carter name. Why are you choosing to destroy it all? I didn't flinch. I quietly slid a file, over 300 pages thick, across the table toward him. This is the full preliminary report. 7 shell companies, 4 major fraudulent transactions, and 2 cases of inflated collateral. I've submitted everything to the SEC and the FBI. Richard stared at the stack of papers, as if it were his death sentence waiting for a signature. I didn't do it alone, he whispered. I nodded. I know. Claire, actually, Victoria Carter, is also under investigation, as a co-conspirator. Arrest warrants were signed this morning. And as if fate had timed it perfectly, my assistant walked in at that moment and whispered. Federal agents have arrived at the Carter estate. Miss Claire, Victoria, has been taken into custody. Assets are being frozen. I didn't look at Richard. I didn't need to see his face. Part of me didn't want to remember it. The other part had seen it too many times before. The face of the powerful, realizing they have nothing left to bargain with. That afternoon, headlines exploded across major news outlets. Carter Holdings CEO arrested for massive financial fraud. Feds uncover money laundering network through Cayman shell firms. The Carter empire collapses after more than 30 years. I sat in my office, no TV, no newspapers, just watching the late sunlight stretch across the wooden floor. No satisfaction, no pride. Just a feeling as light as breath. At last the truth was out. I didn't destroy their empire. They did. I only flipped the switch that turned on the light. Eveline Carter was spotted days later at a budget grocery store, wearing a baseball cap, no makeup, arguing with a cashier over a $2 increase in the price of lettuce. The moment was captured by a passerby. A photo of her, once the face of Belle Meade's elite, now hunched over a cart full of discount items, became the front page of a tabloid with the biting headline, From Diamonds to Discounts, The Fall of Evelyn Carter. I didn't feel joy. I just sighed. James watched everything quietly. He didn't say much during those chaotic days. Every night, he simply held my hands. His hands were cold, but steady. Everything collapsed so fast, he said once, eyes distant. But truth is, it had been rotting for a long time. You just tap the right spot. I placed my hand over his chest, where his heart beat slow and calm. You don't owe them anything, I said. And you don't owe me either. They dug the hole. I just didn't want you to fall in with them. The media called me many things. The ice-cold CEO. The wife who struck back. The coffee girl who brought down a financial titan. They didn't understand. I wasn't out for revenge. I had nothing to prove. I was just doing my job, protecting financial transparency, like I had in thousands of cases before. The only difference was, this time, the violators were my in-laws. That night I stood out on the balcony. The wind was sharp. The city lights glowed below. James wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his head on my shoulder. You know, he whispered, no matter what happens, I'll always be proud I chose you. Not because you're strong, but because you're right. I didn't say anything. I just held his hand tighter. Because I knew the storm wasn't over yet. But from now on, I would never bow my head to anyone again. One October afternoon, as golden leaves scattered across the walkway to our apartment building, I heard the doorbell ring. It wasn't urgent or rushed, just soft, hesitant. James was working at his studio at the time. I walked over, opened the door, and froze. Evelyn Carter, the woman who once refused to shake my hand at our engagement dinner, was standing before me in a worn wool coat. Her face hollow, no makeup, eyes red from the wind or tears, I couldn't tell. In her hands was a cheap plastic container covered with a cloth. No designer bags, no French perfume. Just a heavy silence between two people who had once stood on opposite sides of a battlefield. "How are you, Bella?" she asked, her voice stripped of all pride. I know I shouldn't have come. But there are some things I need to say. I didn't move, just nodded, barely more than a breath. "Come in." We sat at the small dining table where James and I usually had dinner, with soft jazz playing in the background. Evelyn didn't glance around, didn't judge the apartment the way she once would have. She simply bowed her head and placed the plastic container on the table. "I baked cookies," she said, her voice trembling. "James's grandmother's recipe. Back when the kids were little, I used to make them all the time. Then I got too busy chasing fake lights." I stayed silent. "I was wrong," she continued, eyes beginning to water. "Wrong to look down on you. Wrong to judge you for your job, your background. Wrong to believe status could hold a family together." She covered her mouth, trying to hold back the tears. "After Richard and Claire were arrested, I lost everything. The house, the assets, the friends. No one invites me anywhere anymore. I had to beg for a part-time job at the flower shop by the market. At first I cleaned. Now I can arrange a decent bouquet or two." She looked up, meeting my gaze. "But, in losing everything, I saw something I never had before. I saw your strength, your kindness, and your grace. If you can, forgive me." I clenched my hands in my lap. A wave of emotions surged: anger, pity, exhaustion, and a small, strange sense of peace. "Do you know," I began, "during the first year of my marriage, every time I heard your name, I felt my heart go cold. I used to wonder how a mother could be so cruel to someone her son loved." Evelyn bowed her head lower. "No excuses. But," I continued slowly, "I understand now. Pride blinds people. I once thought I'd never forgive you. But I don't want to carry that anger anymore. It's too heavy." I stood up and opened the container. The cookies were uneven, some edges burned, but the smell of butter filled the room. "Are you free tonight? We're making roast chicken and pumpkin. Stay for dinner?" Evelyn looked up, eyes still red but now glimmering with something raw and unhidden. "Really, you don't hate me?" I smiled. "I never forgot that you're the mother of the man I love." From that night on, Evelyn returned not as Mrs. Carter, but as Evelyn, a woman relearning how to love. She moved into a small apartment near the farmer's market. Each morning she biked to the flower shop. In the evenings, she practiced baking and sewing. James visited her weekly, always bringing home a lopsided scarf or a fresh batch of cookies. One day I dropped by unexpectedly and saw her teaching a neighbor's little girl how to shape gingerbread dough. Her silver hair was tied back neatly, her face bare of makeup but glowing with real joy. I stood at the doorway for a long while, not wanting to interrupt. The following January, James and I hosted a small dinner at home to celebrate my birthday. Evelyn brought a homemade carrot cake. Not perfect, but so fragrant the whole building knew about it. She stood at the door, hands trembling as she handed me the box. "Happy birthday, dear. Thank you for giving me a chance." I hugged her, for the first time truly, as someone who felt like family. "Thank you for stepping out of the shadows, Mom." Forgiveness isn't forgetting. Forgiveness is looking straight at the wound and deciding not to let it bleed any longer. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need revenge to win. I just needed to stay true to my values. Because that was what made me different. I was sitting on the rattan chair out on the balcony, holding a warm cup of herbal tea, when James came up behind me and gently placed his hand on my belly. "She's a kicker," he laughed, his eyes lighting up like they did the first time we heard her heartbeat at the clinic. I nodded, my gaze softening as I felt a gentle thump beneath his hand. "She's mine," I whispered, stubborn from the womb. We had named her at 16 weeks, Grace, as a reminder that sometimes, in the midst of chaos, betrayal and pain, something small, tender, and priceless still exists. Grace. Life after everything didn't go back to how it was. It couldn't. And it didn't need to. The Carter family, after the scandal, fell apart. Richard was sentenced to 9 years in prison for organized financial fraud. Claire, more accurately, Victoria Carter, got 5 years, as an accomplice. Evelyn, after losing all her wealth, chose to live humbly, and relearned what it meant to be a mother. As for James, he no longer cared about preserving the family name. One day, while assembling a bookshelf for the nursery, he paused, turned to me and asked, "If you hadn't told the truth that day, would you still have stayed with me?" I looked at him for a long time before answering softly, "I would have still loved you, but I couldn't have lived a life where I had to keep hiding who I am." James nodded and squeezed my hand tightly. "Then thank you for being brave. And thank you for choosing me, even when the whole world stood against it." I kept my job at the bank. I'm now a national vice president. But I work remotely with main meetings only on Mondays and Thursdays. The rest of the time, I focus on the pregnancy, on James, and on the one thing no one ever expected me to continue doing. On weekends, I'm still behind the counter at Everground Cafe. Gray cotton apron, the old espresso machine, brief conversations with customers, a heart on a latte, an extra whipped mocha for someone who just had a terrible week. Everyone who walks in brings their own story. And me, in the simplest way, I get to be a listener. One time, a freshman girl sat for hours in the corner, scribbling on paper, tears silently falling. I brought her a cup of chamomile tea, on the house, and gently placed it on her table. "You okay, sweetheart?" I asked. She looked up, eyes exhausted. "My parents said choosing literature means I'm wasting their whole life." I smiled. I was once the daughter of a truck driver and a night shift grocery cashier. Now I'm a national executive, but on weekends, I still make coffee. Because no path is ever wasted, if you truly love it. She hugged me before she left. And I knew I was still doing the right thing. These days, Evelyn brings me a new batch of baked goods every month. Sometimes banana bread, sometimes almond cookies. She awkwardly learns to cook chicken soup from YouTube. "For the baby," she says. James watches his mother fumble with flour in her hair and bursts out laughing, for the first time in years, with no bitterness in his eyes. One afternoon, she stood beside me in the kitchen, hands dusted with flour, and suddenly said, "Bella, I used to hate you, because you dared to challenge the world I clung to all my life. Now I only hope that one day, Grace will stand as tall as her mother." I said nothing. Just held her hand. Light as the first breeze of spring. On a late autumn night, as gentle rain fell and the whole city of Nashville seemed to lull itself to sleep in the rustle of leaves, I sat by the window, writing a journal entry to Grace. "My sweet girl. By the time you read this, you may not understand it all. But I want you to know. Life is never simple. Some people will hate you just because you're different. Some will fear you because you dare to speak up. And there will be moments when you feel like there's no place in the world for you. But don't be afraid. Because you will make your own place. Hold on to kindness, even if the world calls it weakness. Stay true to yourself, even if everyone expects you to pretend. And if one day you feel alone, remember, sometimes all it takes is a cup of coffee and a listening heart to ease someone's storm. I love you. You are my whole world." James walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. "What are you writing?" I closed the notebook and smiled. "Just a little note for Grace, so she'll know her mom was once a coffee girl the whole world looked down on." He leaned down and kissed my forehead, whispering, "But made the whole world take a second look at itself." I looked out the window, where the streetlights shimmered in the rain. This life isn't perfect. But I have lived truthfully, loved wholeheartedly and forgiven sincerely, and for me, that is enough. Bella's story is a powerful reminder that true worth doesn't come from background or reputation, but from courage, kindness, and staying true to oneself. Though she was looked down on, hurt, and betrayed, she didn't choose revenge driven by hate, but justice, delivered with compassion. Amidst pretense and vanity, Bella held on to her genuine heart, and that's what allowed her to build a life full of meaning and love. A cup of coffee, a steady heart. Sometimes, that's all it takes to change the world. What do you think about Bella's choices and how she faced the judgment from her in-laws? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more meaningful stories about family, trust, and resilience.